We know that far too often the data we generate from research takes a long, long time if it ever makes it into clinical practice. But really what happens more commonly is that the experiences that we have every day looking after patients don't get translated back into the healthcare system to provide better care and improve the system for which the patients are cared within. This is where we really fall short. And if we're serious about improving healthcare, we need to close this gap between generating data and doing research or knowledge generation and caring for patients. We really need to be caring for patients while we learn how to care for patients best. As we think about learning and improvement, it's also to remember where we are and where we've come from. The university and the health system is rooted on lands where relationships and knowledge and healing traditions have existed for generations well before we got here. In the spirit of that history and the treaties that we know about, we are reminded that, well, we could talk about data and knowledge today. The real success comes from relationships, from listening, from respect, and from reciprocity. When we talk about learning health systems, we really need to be focused on learning from and within Indigenous populations. So whatever we create will serve every Manitoban equitably in ways that resonate and are culturally appropriate with their teachings and expectations. We have to make sure that all voices are heard in the process. So we're fortunate today to be joined by two of Canada's leading thinkers on learning health systems. John Lavis is a professor at McMaster University, director of the McMaster Health Forum, and holds a Canada Research Chair in Evidence Support Systems. He's internationally recognized for his work on evidence-informed policy making, knowledge translation, and systems learning. Rob Reid is the chief scientist at Trillium Health Partners Institute for Better Health. It's a massive hospital within Ontario that has led the way a lot because of Rob's leadership in the creation of learning health systems. He also has a Canada Research Chair in Learning Health Systems, and together Dr. Lavis and Dr. Reid will sort of bring their expertise and practical experience on what it takes to create a learning health system in Manitoba, how we might catch up for where we have fallen behind perhaps, and how we might be on the leading edge of creating a system that is working for patients to generate knowledge and that we can learn from as we participate within it. Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, Rob, for coming today.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks to you, Ryan, Sarah, and Carly for all of the organization for today. We are going to try and do this in kind of 25, 30 minutes and then leave all the rest of the time for questions. So just keep that in mind. We're going to dive right in, and I'm just going to say you got the week half of what is normally a 4-member delivery team. So we normally deliver this with Maureen Smith. Some of you may know her. Absolute, what's the expression? Firecracker of a citizen partner who we've had the good fortune to work with for a really long time, and Heather Reid, who's a system and organizational partner. And because we come at this from such different lenses, which you really need to do if you want to support learning health systems, ideally all 4 of us would be here. So just keep in mind that you're hearing from the 2 old farts, male farts, not from the folks who have the really, really rich experiences. We're going to keep coming back to this slide that you see here, 2 actions at the heart of a learning health system. We're going to focus primarily on that first bullet point and keep coming back to different pieces in that first bullet point. So the first one there, you'll see used learning and improvement cycles organized around tests of change in all layers of the system, and Rob's going to talk about what we mean by all those layers. And we're going to come back to, in part 2, drawing on existing assets. And we're going to talk to you about what we see the amazing assets are in Manitoba and invite you to fill in the blanks where we've missed them and ask you to think about what, if anything, is missing. And we're going to talk about the 3 legs in the stool. The 3 legs in the stool being the kind of system operators. That's normally the perspective Heather brings. The citizen partner or the patient family caregiver partner, that's the perspective Maureen normally brings, and then folks like Rob and me who are more on the research side. And then again, we'll come back, but just touch on briefly making any change for the better, the new normal. Because what we do a lot of in healthcare is we try something, it actually makes things better for patients, but we don't lock it in and make sure that everybody who should benefit from that service actually has the benefit of receiving that service. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob. He's going to talk through a couple of slides about the learning health system.
Yeah, thanks, John. Can you hear me okay? Oh, there we go. The learning health system idea has been around the world now about 20 years. And it's really starting to take hold, and really good examples now internationally around what it really means for a system to learn with evidence rapidly. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a model that we created in Ontario as a practical way to think about a learning health system in a real system. In our case, it was a hospital system, but this model has resonated now across Canada and is being progressively adopted. But it's a real practical way to think about it. So let me walk through it a little bit, and we're going to give you a little bit more insights later. The learning health system model here, it looks like an engine. And because it is an engine, and it has a variety of learning gears that rotate. They don't rotate by themselves. They rotate together through different types of evidence, producing it in rapid cycle for healthcare to improve. And really here, there's 5 really main themes of evidence that we'll talk about. One is the first one is all about data and population insights. It's understanding the nature of the problems that we have, the nature of the inequities, what's causing them, what patients' perspectives are. And it's really around data and population insights to understand problems. The second is all around understanding from other perspectives, what's worked to solve those problems in other places in the world, in your own locales. And so it's bringing together, synthesizing existing evidence really together to make it, to bring it into the idea rapidly, systematically, comprehensively. And then we bring these 2 sources of evidence together into really evidence-based co-design processes where we bring people together to try to solve problems. And this is bringing patients, families, caregivers, physicians, nurses, many other healthcare personnel is really to figure out how to solve the problems that are complex, system-wide, and have a variety of different nuances into really scientific or into evidence-based co-design processes. But then it doesn't stop there. Once you've got something that we believe would work in our current situation that's contextualized, it's really now putting it into action and using the themes of implementation science now to implement it. So as John was saying, it reaches the people we want it to reach. So that's locked in, so it gets there. So using evidence-based, the explosion of the current work in implementation science to do that, leveraging all of that. And then finally, it's about rapid cycle evaluation and feedback. I don't know about you, John, but I've never been in a large initiative that's worked right out of the gate the first time on all and hit a home run on all bases. It never does. It always needs shaping. It needs refinement. And so this is really bringing evidence into refining existing things so that we can make them better and better and reach the people that we want. So that's the learning improvement cycle. It looks like a quality improvement cycle, and in many respects it is, but now we're using really advanced evidence and evidence in terms of that improvement cycles.
And just a reminder, it's 30 minutes for the whole talk, not per slide.
Okay. John, quick. Okay. John said that okay. I've actually mostly said what I'm going to say later, John, so that's good. The learning and improvement cycles can happen at many layers, as John was saying. The first layer we always think about is at the patient-clinician level. It's bringing rapid evidence into play so that the patient can get the best available interventions at the right time across the board. Then we move up about how then we organize health systems at the local level, at an organizational level. And then we need at the more senior levels around how to finance, how to regulate, and how to actually sustain these types of systems. So if you think about learning and improvement, it can operate at any of these levels. John?
Yep. So
now he has to go quick.
Yeah. So, one of the things that comes up a lot is we're doing this already. So recently we convened a number of key players in Ontario who said they were doing learning health system stuff. And we said to them, well, talk us through what you're doing. So we had two groups that when we listened to them, we thought, but you're only using Gear 1. So good for you, great place to start, but that's not a learning health system on its own. One was focused on trying to create a learning health system for kids with neurodevelopmental disorders, and other trying to help people with concussion. Then we had a couple of groups that were focused not at the population level, but at the organization and local system level. So a group at Women's College firing on all cylinders on the implementation front, not really doing the other pieces, but doing that one piece really, really well. Then we had a group, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but Partners is kind of a group of home care providers, is that right? And they were doing an amazing job on co-design and a really amazing job at evaluation, adaptation, and feedback, but they weren't doing the other pieces. And then we had a group in the Niagara region. There's this dynamo, Jennifer Sang, who was trying to get these community hospitals to do more pragmatic controlled trials. Good for you, Jennifer. A really important piece of the puzzle, just not on its own an entire learning health system. And then finally, we had a really good colleague at Northern Ontario School of Medicine, Brianne. Amazing stuff at the front end with population analytics, and a really amazing job at the back end with that monitoring, evaluation, and learning, but not so much the stuff in the middle. So really great first steps, but on their own, not yet quite at a learning health system. So what we've done is we've got 3 examples for you where we think people have put the different gears together and really are trying to make sure that they work well together. So one's at the organization and system level, and the role of Heather Bullock will be played by me. I'll just quickly walk you through it. We'll give Rob a bit more time for the hip fracture example, which is an organizational one. And then we'll go to a sub-regional level where, again, I'll play the role of Heather and talk to you about how she implemented the structured psychotherapy program. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. The neat thing about this first one is they went through 2 big cycles. So in cycle 1 for the data, they only had variations in care. They knew that people were getting vastly different experiences, and that was true for mainstream populations, for Indigenous people, for Black people, and other people of color. But when they came around in the second run, they put in place a dashboard so that they were systematically connecting race, ethnicity, and language data, systematically collecting sexual orientation and gender identity data. So then they had far more robust information for their second cycle of improvement. Year 2, they were in a really unique position. They were working with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in the United States. They were connected to their evidence syntheses, but they now have developed an in-house synthesis lab called STREAM. They had extraordinary engagements with equity-deserving groups and with staff, patient, family, caregiver groups, community leaders. Because of their connection to IHI, they had an auditing system. They provided regular feedback to folks about how they were doing. And then with Gear 5, continuous process improvements, and they had the benefit of benchmarking. So they were unique because although they were a relatively small organization, they were able to leverage IHI to drive their learning and improvement cycles. So that's Heather's example. Rob's going to do a bit of a deeper dive on the hip fracture one.
Yeah, very quick. I'll try and be real quick on this one too, John. This was, as Ryan was saying, Trillium Health Partners is one of the largest hospitals in Canada by volume, huge place. And it had a real problem, and it was around managing people with hip fractures. They were not getting into the hospital. They were coming to the emergency room. They weren't getting admitted very quickly. They weren't getting surgery very quickly. They would decline very quickly after surgery, and then we couldn't get them out of the hospital because of the declines that they had. So they had extraordinarily long lengths of stay. It was a real problem around these patients with hip fractures. And there were many, many of them. And so that they ended up staying in the hospital longer and blocking the beds for other patients. So this became an organizational priority to try to really fix this problem. So the first gear was really around using evidence to understand the nature of this problem. How long people were staying there, what was how old were they, what was their socioeconomic profile, and what were what was the care patterns like when they were actually in the hospital. The team that was involved in this looked across the world around how do we deliver hip fracture care in better ways. Everything from managing hip fracture in the emergency room to better scheduling of the operating rooms to better management of hip fractures post-operatively, and then best practices around the rehabilitation for hip fracture care. And based on those two things, went into a full redesign process with everybody from surgeons to physicians in the emergency room to nurses on those hip fracture wards to people, home care nurses that would work in the community, and really 150 people in a room together redesigning from front to end that hip fracture pathway in the hospital. And then really moved to full implementation across the hospital using real implementation science techniques, like having champions on the ward, using really good communication strategies to all the clinical departments, all the nurses, to know exactly what the expectation was of care, and so forth. And then really worked around rapid cycle improvements. It didn't work always the first time, and so they had to go back and make it work again. But within just a short period of a year, we saw the number of people getting hip fracture surgery on time went from an average of about 30% up to 80% of people were receiving hip fracture care on time. And the length of care, length of stay in the hospital dramatically reduced to allow other people that needed care into the hospital sooner. So this was a real example of using a very comprehensive to solve a real critical problem for the hospital.
Great. It's okay. I've got my. I'm not going to go through Heather's all the way in detail. I'll just say, if you look down at some of the lower level bullets, starting with gear 3 and then gear 5, the interesting thing here was they ended up with 3 processes. They ended up one for kind of the undifferentiated population, one for francophones, and one for indigenous peoples. And each one went through its own loop and ended up in very different places. So what was meant to initially be a one-size-fits-all structured psychotherapy program ended up being highly differentiated by those 3 groups. And as Heather notes here, the improvements ended up being greater with the Indigenous tailored one. So the one that was designed by and for Indigenous peoples got people farther faster to better outcomes than the other 2 population groups. So interesting example of how you can approach it as one size fits all, or you can recognize the very unique needs of different communities and engage them in driving the improvement. If Maureen would hear, Maureen would have 2 messages. One is how great that patient, family, and caregivers were involved in the co-design phase for all 3 of these examples. But what she would also say is, don't just put us in the co-design bucket. We want to be there for the population analytics work at the front end where we understand problems. We want to be there where you look at the evidence to interpret what it means for people like us. We want to be there when you think about implementation. We want to be there when you think about monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation. So patient, family, caregivers don't just get lumped into the gear 3 bucket. So we've talked a little bit about the tests of change, the idea that learning health systems are all about these learning and improvement cycles. But some other things to emphasize are these 3 legs in the stool. And this comes from Maureen, our citizen partner, who in the early days said, I'm worried about this learning health system stuff because I have this stool metaphor in my head, but it feels like a very wobbly stool, and the weak part of the stool is actually patient, families, and caregivers. Not because of them, but because the system and the organizations are not making it easy for them to engage in all of this work. So they can't fulfill the roles that they ideally should be playing. So we talk about these 3 stools of system operator, patient, family, caregiver, partner, and then these evidence trades, which I'll come back to in a minute. So Rob's going to walk us in a little bit more detail through the 5 gears, and then we'll walk into how they come together.
And I think it's mentioned many of these before, so I think we can skip through these fairly quickly. I just want to reemphasize these gears again. So remember that the first gear is all around data, understanding the nature of problems, and actually using data to solve problems. And we want data to be as close to real time as possible. If it's a year old or 2 years old, it's not terribly helpful in many respects around rapid cycle improvement. And now with the benefits of electronic medical records and so forth, we now have the technical ability to bring real-time data into place. It's now just making it available for us. And it's often now working in concert with people within the health system that are real experts around data, business intelligence functions, analytics and decision support functions, people working clinical informatics and so forth. So it's really partnering with data-specific people right within the hospital. And don't forget, it's not just about quantitative data, it's about qualitative data around. It's around understanding the stories of people that are either delivering care or experiencing care. The second is really around evidence support, and I won't go into too much around this, but it's really around what's worked elsewhere and what's not worked. What are the key components that made those interventions work in other locations? And then what were the conditions that were key to making that work, to see if you could replicate many of those conditions in our center, in our system. And there are many places in Canada that now provide these types of high-level synthesis supports. Caregiver co-design, I really won't dwell on this as much, other than to make sure, as Ryan was saying at the beginning, that we really lift the voices of everybody and the experiences of everybody, bring them into co-design, and really make sure that disadvantaged or equity-deserving groups have their needs, their perspectives brought out and acted upon in those design sessions. And that's often really correcting power differentials and so forth as we think about deliberately about co-design. Implementation, this is all about systematically converting findings into sticky practices so that they actually are really taken up and they reach the entire, and there are many parts of our system that have expertise in these areas, the quality improvement teams, project management teams, health informatics implementers, and so forth. So it's actually partnering with many of these assets that our health systems already have in our, they're available. And then finally, it's about rapid cycle evaluation and feedback. And again, this is realist evaluation. This is about bringing rapid evidence to bear so that we can change things, either change the design if we haven't got it quite right, or change the implementation strategy if that's not correct as well.
Thanks, Rob. So this this is back to the three legs in the stool. So that first column kind of summarizes in one place all those assets that were at the bottom of the previous 5 slides. So you may call them different things in Manitoba, but if you look through that list, you have a lot of them in the health system here. And the issue is, are they being aligned in service to drive changes in areas of priority? Then you have all the way in for the patient, family, caregiver partners. You may have advisory councils, they may be involved in research teams, they may be involved in co-design events and so on. And then you have the different forms of evidence and what we call the trades. So some of you will know the general contractor trade relationship. If I want to renovate my kitchen, I don't want to have to hire the plumber and the electrician and the tiler and all these people. I want to hire a general practitioner. If you're a system operator, you want to hire a general contractor for evidence who hears the question and realizes I need this form of evidence and that form of evidence. One possible player of that role in the Manitoba system is CHI. Well positioned to say for that question, we need these different forms of evidence. I'm not going to go through Maureen's couple of slides in detail. I'll just say that she believes that a lot of this stuff is happening in most health systems. It's just not labeled as such, and it's not joined up in a way that is optimized to get the kinds of impacts that we would like. She would also say we're seeing more and more engagement of patient, family, caregiver partners, but not enough attention to making sure that diverse voices are being heard in that process. She also sees a lot of challenges with the ways that we currently engage patient, family, caregiver partners. You'll see them as the row headers, but she also sees a lot of opportunities for doing better. And you're better positioned than Rob and me to say, where are you in Manitoba with the systematic engagement of patient, family, caregiver partners in all of those roles that Maureen describes here. That was leg 2 in the stool. Leg 3 in the stool are these different evidence trades. So Rob went through these questions that the different gears can answer. You can match different forms of evidence to each of those gears. So if you're doing the analytics and population insights, data analytics comes in, modeling, qualitative insights, you may actually want evidence syntheses at this stage to say, well, what have we learned about problems and drivers of problems in other jurisdictions like Manitoba? When it comes to the co-design, you may want to look at evaluations, at modeling, at qualitative insights, and so on. When it comes to the 4th and 5th gears, you're certainly going to look at behavioral and implementation research. You may look at some of those other forms of evidence, but you may also create new evidence, flows of new evidence through the act of doing your learning and improvement cycle. So a lot of learning health systems is using the existing stock of evidence, but we can also create flows of new evidence as we learn and improve. And pragmatic controlled trials are one example. Rob, over to you.
And pragmatic control trials are really a real in vogue, and for good reason. They are really randomized controls that are set in real life settings, and I know that you have aspirations of really moving in this agenda in Manitoba, and it's really determined if interventions are effective under typical operations, generate that knowledge so they can be rapidly implemented within systems. It operates mostly at that clinical level around what works for what patients under what conditions, and it provides short-term value, can provide short-term value directly to patients. It isn't in itself an iterative cycle of improvement, but it can part of an evidence cycle for those iterative cycles, and so. While practical control trials are really single studies, you can embed them in a larger learning health system framework.
A couple other things. So this is me just quickly, and I want all of you to be thinking about what your answer to this question is. What assets exist in Manitoba that would help a contractor trying to mix and match the right trades in response to a question? So when I look at Manitoba, so if I look at websites here in the province, for data analytics, I see CHI. For the use of more traditional administrative data, I see Manitoba Centre. For evaluation, I see things like CHI's trials unit. For evidence synthesis, again, a synthesis unit here. What else exists in these buckets of trades in Manitoba that we've missed? Where's the guideline shop? Where's the HTA shop? I think they exist, but where are they?
I'm not sure they exist.
You're not sure they are? They do? Okay, but you have some capacity at CHI to support guideline development, is that correct? Somewhat limited?
I've never seen that happen locally,
Okay.
but I may not know.
And what about behavioral and implementation research? Is there a kind of center of excellence, even initially a few people who do really good behavioral implementation research? There must be. I see people who self-identify as doing, I see a finger pointing at. Great, super. So are you really, you can't be the only one in Manitoba. Oh, you have other people around you? Fantastic. So we want you to be thinking about what assets already exist, and the question is, but are they being engaged and aligned to the big questions of the day, whether they're coming from Manitoba Health or they're coming from what's it called, shared services, or whether they're coming from the Health Sciences Center right here? Are those incredible gifts that exist in the province being aligned to the current needs of the health system? The next slide is about the assets that you have with that other leg. So when I look at shared health, sorry, that's the name of it, shared health, quality, patient safety, and accreditation, some of these functions currently sit there. I think they used to sit sometimes in other places. They've now been brought together. Manitoba seems to be an active participant in choosing wisely. What are the other system assets that can support learning and improvement? I've given you a couple of other examples from other provinces. You'll know the strategic clinical networks, perhaps, in Alberta. We have things like RISE, Centre for Effective Practice in Ontario. what else exists in Manitoba that would be really important in supporting learning and improvement cycles? You look like you're about to jump in. No, okay. So we're not going to have time to talk about making any change for the better, the new normal. I'll just say this is the other half of the battle. So you want to try new things, learn and improve. You never get it right the first time. You always need to bring in many different types of insights from patients, family caregivers, from the different evidence trades, from these different assets in the system like quality improvement. But you're going to learn and improve, and then you're going to find out this works. And you need to make it the new normal. If it worked for this constellation of people, it should be offered to everybody in the province who meets the same criteria. So how do you make any change for the better, the new normal? I'll just say briefly that in the lower right corner, you can lock it in with things like changes to electronic health records, to new accountability mechanisms. You can use funding levers and other things. So for most of us, it's above our pay grade, but it's still a critical piece of a learning health system to have a regional authority and a provincial health system that can lock in those new improvements. So anytime a big priority comes along, ask yourself the question, well, what if we harnessed these different assets? What if we brought together those different legs in the stool and we committed to learning and improvement cycles? Right now in Ontario, priority number one, as some of you may know, attaching every Ontarian to a primary care team. Biggest investment ever in primary care in the province, I think $1.6 billion committed. They're 50% of the way there to reaching the target. All of the assets are focused on how do you help to achieve that goal. So with our RISE hats on, Rob and I co-lead RISE, our coaches are helping to support this, but we've taken it through this kind of thinking. For Manitoba, our question to you is, what are the big priorities in the health system that you would want to align your learning and improvement assets towards? We've got two examples here, stroke strategy implementation. Well, who would be the focus? Is this about the hospitals, about internists, about stroke units? What's the level of focus? And then how would you think about mobilizing those different gears? If it's emergency department wait times, how would you think through, again, what are those different gears? What are the assets in the system that you're going to align in order to drive improvements or reductions, in this case, I should say, in emergency department wait times? I think this is the penultimate slide. We've talked a lot about the gears, but the leaders in the health system can play a really, really big role with providing fuel and accelerants and trying to address the moderators and brakes that can make this kind of work difficult. Some of the fuel and accelerants that are important are those learning and improvement platforms and networks, CHI, as an example of a platform, a strong three-legged stool, leadership and funding, including priority setting. Someone has to say, these are the three most important things in 2026 that the system needs to improve, and we're going to align all of our assets to driving improvements in those domains. And then some of the challenges that we're up against, the culture. We think we're going to get it right the next time. Healthcare is so hard to change. We never get it right the first time. We have to figure out how do we learn and improve and keep getting better. Capacity or bandwidth. Rob sometimes talks about this as QI on steroids or QI in supportive system transformation. So if you learned about QI, a lot of those concepts apply in this space as well. Another big challenge is lack of alignment of existing assets. Rob and I have been struggling with this on the primary care front. Would you say, is that too honest to admit to over the last 6 months, that we have this big provincial imperative, but we couldn't convince the two big players, the Ministry of Health and Ontario Health, to align the assets in the system to support it. So everybody is kind of fiddling around, not doing the important stuff because we couldn't get agreement on how would we align things. And then insufficient agility in responding to changing priorities. So a lot of us get our hearts set on working on a particular topic, but the reality is governments change, health ministers change, CEOs of hospital change, all kinds of people change, and we need to be able to pivot because that's where the puck is, and we need to skate towards where the puck is. So just keep in mind that we need to be attentive to both the fuel and accelerants, and the moderators and brakes. So think about what are the pockets of learning health system excellence in Manitoba. From outside, we see a number. We also see gaps, like those real-time data analytics platforms that we've heard Ryan and others talk about not yet being in place. Another big challenge is alignment. So this stuff may be there, but it's not being aligned. And a third problem may be it's not clear what the shared priorities are that these assets should be aligned towards. So those are some questions to ponder.
One thing I've learned over over my career in Ontario, John, is you build assets by doing work often. So you're actually building your assets for data, your assets for synthesis, those types of things as you're engaging in these large portions of work to solve problems. And then you're thinking about how to make those assets extend to beyond the life of that individual product so that they become a system asset unto themselves. So, and I think that has been working in Ontario as we're building things. So we don't wait until something's built. We start and we build as we go.
Yeah. All right, we didn't fully gain back our time, but we do have 21 minutes for question and answers. And there are microphones on each side of the room, and there's people online. So we'll go to, I think, a split screen. Ryan, did you want to jump in?
So I wanted to thank you both for coming from Ontario. I know your flights were delayed. Thanks to
Air Canada.
Air Canada. Probably incorporate some of the processes you talked about.
Yes,
Yeah.
There, yes.
Yeah, so thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge Sarah Kirby and Carly Leggett from the Center for Health Innovation to help organize this visit today. I'm Ryan Zarchansky, the Scientific Director of the Center for Health Innovation. We're really focused on making the system work better and moving all of these gears together. You highlighted a lot of challenges for us, and I think we're going to have a really robust discussion about where we are, where do we go from here, what do we see as some of the opportunities and barriers. So thank you for opening up that conversation. Feel free to engage in discussion for those who would dare to do so.
Maybe as people are thinking about questions, I can just think about another example, just around how Manitoba is actually the perfect size for this type of thing. If you look across the world about systems that are really moving rapidly in this direction, it's about the size of Manitoba. It's got a population that's big enough. It's not too complex to be able to do it, and it's got a real lot of trusted partnerships already in place. So I think you're perfectly aligned in so many respects to just take this and run.
Quick question. At the data collection level, has Ontario achieved a single medical record across the entire province, number one? Two, are you using predominantly one vendor, Epic? And three, within that framework, are you able to actually customize it enough to actually collect the data you want to collect? Or are you forced to stick with what they've created globally that you can't really adapt it to your own needs? So I'd be interested to hear your
Did you have to go right for the jugular?
No, I think this is a big issue, right? So it's great to say we're going to collect and have real-time data, but if you don't have the tools to do it, that's really an issue.
We do not have the tools in Ontario. Oh my gosh. We not only have many medical records, but just with Epic, we will have multiple instances in the same town that don't speak to each other. So we are catastrophically behind on the EHR front. Rob?
Yeah, I agree. Don't mimic yourselves over after Ontario in terms of its EMR journey. But Epic is one of the dominant forces now, and many of the hospitals are now starting to merge hospital EMR records. The large hospitals are now almost all Epic installations, or many of them in Ontario. And to your question about using EMR directly from Epic for these types of activities, this is what we've been doing at Trillium now for over 5 years, is actually extracting data from Epic, putting it into the data warehouses we need, and actually using it. So we do have a bit of a track record now around actually how to do that.
And were you able to customize it? Like, is the vendor going to open enough that you can actually say, well, we need to collect these areas, and it's not in what you've given us as the...
Yeah, most of it's there. We have selected tools that are able to be customized Some of them you can and some of them you can't, but within the confines of EPIC, it's amazing what you can do and actually collect data that you need.
And my other major question is, within the health system, has government or the health system leadership created the space for the personnel to have the time to do what you're talking about? Or is it defaulting to sides of the desk?
I think it's still defaulting to the sides of the desk. So we've had one kick at the can with a 2-hour session with the executive leadership team of both the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care. They're really committed to it, but they have not solved that issue. So this is being done off the side of the desk in an already overtaxed health workforce. So it's a real challenge.
Right, so is that something that you think would really be an accelerant if we could actually find a way of convincing the governments and the health authorities to say, there has to be a dedicated workforce that's actually going to drive this whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and in some respects, what we do is think about mimicking it over the quality improvement journey, making quality improvement a part of every day's work and creating capacity in every healthcare workers, theoretically, to do quality improvement. But you do have dedicated quality improvement teams and quality improvement personnel that actually drive those quality improvement cycles. The same type of thinking could be used here. And at least at Trillium, we do have dedicated people now that are funded, largely through philanthropic dollars, to drive these learning health systems activities. We still haven't figured out how to create work time on everybody's schedule to participate, the doctors, the nurses, and the healthcare providers. So that's a real challenge in today's environment.
Thanks.
Thanks.
That was Dr. Nickerson, our Dean and
Oh, thanks,
Vice
Dr.
Provost of our Reid
Yeah.
Faculty of Health
Nice.
Sciences. So just
Thank you, Dr.
yeah.
Nicholson. He asked the tough questions.
These are very tough questions, exactly.
Thank you, Peter.
We have a question online right now. How would you advise a province to better engage and align their learning health system resources to meet the needs of the health system? Do you have any lessons learned to share?
Rob?
One is, at least is actually getting provincial level endorsement and really starting to work around aligning, really recognizing that these things need to be aligned with funding cycles, with priorities and so forth. Once we start moving in that direction, the people working in those agencies in those areas are more than willing to work with each other, I found, to do that. But the government really and the health authority really needs to work to align what the expectations of it are, those agencies, what they're supposed to be doing, and the current way that they're funded. Once we have that more in place, things can actually align in much more rapid ways. John, do you have anything?
I would just add that, we've had the good fortune to collaborate with a number of other colleagues in other provinces. And the example that pops out in my mind is Newfoundland and Labrador, where their vision was a learning, health, and social system. And in their executive leadership team, they have a VP learning, health, and social system whose job is to try to put in place the fuel and accelerants, to try and address the moderators and breaks, to try to figure out how do you free up people's time. So I think there are models of how you carve out leadership roles that can be dedicated to this particular piece. And then there was one other point that I was going to raise that's gone out of my head about creating a space for the work at the leadership level. Anyway, I'll come back to it, Sarah. It's a really good question.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Kate Sibley. I'm part of CHI and a faculty at U of M. And thank you for your talk. A lot of what you were saying really resonated with some of the issues that we're seeing. And I think identifying shared priorities within the system is a critical factor we continue to work on. One of the questions that I had was when you gave your 3 case examples of the teams that are doing it well, what continues to strike me is that we're still largely operating about these systems at fairly micro levels. And I'm really interested in the context behind the cases that are able to make it work. And I'm wondering if you what sort of deep dives you've done into those. And it's clear we're sort of starting with the low-hanging fruit with these cases that can work. And some of the areas I work in are a bit more complicated in that. And I'm already sort of going into like, okay, you're in a hospital. This is one particular health issue that's really sort of aligned with some of these things. How do we then get even bigger and more complex? Thanks.
I'll try answering that, and then John will give you the real answer. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. So far, we're still trying to get the mechanism working. We're still making these wheels work. And so we've chosen examples, most systems that are feasible, that are you can actually get things on board, and you can actually practically solve problems. So they're often complex, but not overly complex. They've got a lot of people involved, but not way too many people involved to really make that work. But once we get things more in usual practice around these improvement cycles, then I think the idea is to move to larger problems. We have not tackled things like homelessness or many of our mental health challenges, or in Ontario around really, for instance, long-term care, people in long-term care in hospitals and so forth. So large, really intractable problems are probably not the place to start to learn how to do this. It's probably smaller, more feasible things at the beginning.
And I don't know if you'd agree, Rob, but it feels like where we're really trying to do it at a more complex area is with the primary care mandate, trying to attach every Ontarian. So millions and millions of Ontarians have no family physician, no nurse practitioner, no access to a team, and there was a political commitment made to attach everybody. But we know attachment is just step one. Like having you added to a roster is a tick box exercise, but do you have access to advanced access scheduling that you can call up in the morning at 8:30 and get a same day appointment for an urgent issue? Will you have a continuous longitudinal relationship with people? Can you, even if your family physician is a solo practitioner, can behind the scenes people work together so you can have access to a nurse, to a social worker, to a pharmacist, to these other providers that are currently possible only if you're attached to a model like a family health team. So I think we've cut to the heart of, right now in Ontario, the single biggest system transformation, and we're currently at this stage of trying to figure out how do we align the assets, how do we set up the learning and improvement cycles? And it's so highly politicized that's where we've lost the last 6 months to waiting for the political decisions to get made before we can get the okay to proceed. So we've been a bit frustrated by not being able to move, but we now have the go-ahead finally to move. But I think you can deal with the complex, but I think Rob's right. Trying to get the gears to move initially can be hard enough.
Yeah, I think that's our next challenge is primary care transformation in Ontario, which is a huge problem. It's very complex, many different areas. But one of the biggest problems in primary care in Ontario is we've had lots of experimentation over how many years? 30 years, John? And there's been some successes, and it hasn't spread. And so we've got a real fractured primary care system out there that's currently with some good things, some not so good things, and we really now have to create the idea that it's about learning and improvement cycles. We're really going to start, we're going to keep improving, you're not going to get it right the first time, and it's constantly needing to improve. So that's where we are in primary care at the moment.
The funny thing is that if Maureen were here, she would say, 2 or 3 years ago when she first really got involved in this stuff, her reaction as a patient or family or caregiver partner was, are you telling me this doesn't happen now? Like there's not people behind the scenes that are trying to figure out on the biggest priorities of the day, how do we systematically learn and improve? How is that possible that you could spend so much money on healthcare and not have that as be a core function? So she hammers away at this all the time and embarrasses deputy ministers and heads of provincial authorities and other people by saying, how can this be that this isn't a core function of the system, that it periodically revisits its priorities and says we are going to move the needle on this because it is important for the people of this province, and we are going to align our assets, and we are going to keep getting better and better at it and really move the needle on these metrics that matter to everyday people.
Yeah, John, you couldn't make a better point than that. The really, really critical in moving this forward is actually those patient partners, is actually having them help drive the agenda, having them sort of say, no, we've got to do this. We've got to actually move forward. This is important to us, and really using their voices to really help speed things forward. That has been remarkably powerful, at least in the environments I've been working.
Carly?
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. I'm actually going to pick up on that a little bit. So thanks for mentioning the quadruple aim. You know, sometimes we see that there's one of the four aims that tends to speak the loudest, right? And that's the reducing costs. And so I was wondering if you could reflect, like, you know, on the dollars and cents of it all and your experience with some of these examples, and has that been a compelling case? Like, how have you put it in terms that sometimes speak within political context?
Your hip was very focused on cost, right? Your hip fracture?
Well, it
'Cause
was,
you were a
but
real outlier on the cost
it
side.
was really a cost, and it wasn't really cost per se, it was capacity, right?
Oh.
We weren't ever going to reduce costs, we were just going to increase capacity at the hospital so more patients could be seen. And the way to do that was to reduce the expenditures that were going to all of this hip fracture care. But it was also really important to make sure we kept sight of those other aims at the same time. So we wanted to improve the experience of hip fracture patients, because it was pretty crappy sitting in the emergency room for long periods of time, not getting appropriate anesthesia then, not getting your surgery in time, and then not finding a place to go home and getting supports at home. Those experience markers were pretty poor. And so, and the experience was similar around the emergency room staff. They didn't want these patients in the emergency room. They wanted to be getting their care and their surgery earlier and so forth. So keeping those four aims in view all the time was really important. Although you're right, driving was increasing capacity. These other aims were really important as well.
I've always been impressed to the extent to which R&D or like learning has not been incorporated as a budgetary, requirement of our large health systems. And they try to do more and more with the volume thrown at them, but don't have very much invested in how to do it better and more efficiently to make their money go further.
Yeah.
Like we're talking $1 billion health system, and we have like very little, in Manitoba that is shared health. Yeah. It seems like I acknowledge all the importance of the gears, like of everyone individually, but whether we're talking about any one of those, they're all underpinned by data. Like our knowledge that we gained is really knowledge, which is a data point, and whether that's an inpatient an issue, a social metric, or anything in between that. We struggle with this in Manitoba, and where are you at, and what have you seen being done provincially, but also nationally, to build more robust data systems so we can learn together individually and then nationally?
Well, you know much more about data than me. I would just say that what's been so interesting to me watching the Ministry of Health in Ontario and Ontario Health is they are really focused on how do you get to as close to near-time data analytics as you can, but the system's not designed to make that easy. So what I see them do time and time again is they start with literally manual data collection and spreadsheets. Then they move them into some kind of business intelligence system, and then eventually they'll try to figure out how do you mainstream it in electronic health records. But because we have a fractured landscape, that can be hard. But sometimes that's the best that you can do. But I think what we're all aspiring to is this near real-time integrated clinical data system, because as you say, it's going to drive so much of everything, including it's going to be a key contributor to all 5 gears. Rob?
Yeah, and if you look at the history of data for research and care, Canada many, many years ago was top of the world, including this province with the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. The early work of that center in terms of its data was better than anywhere in the world. I'll say that right now. So congratulations to the legacy of the Manitoba Centre. I think what's happened though over the time is that we haven't kept pace with the data developments that has been needed with the new forms of data, with the rapid use of data, with now data coming directly from EMRs, now with the use of new mechanisms like AI that will actually do generative data and so forth. So we just have to actually get on this ship a little bit quicker, and actually now we have these data assets, it's now actually organizing them in a certain way. When I started at Trillium, this was one of our major strategies to really lift a learning health system capabilities was the developing of data infrastructure that was real-time generated out of data, and that had analytic supports right into it. And we have been chipping away at this for the last 5 years. And while we have not solved the problem locally at all, we have significant headway. And we marry it together with the similar data that you have at the Manitoba Center with ICS data now at Trillium. So we have the advantage now of data infrastructures that we wouldn't have had 5 years ago, but it's been methodical work to build those data infrastructures.
And I wonder to what extent, I'm one of those people who believes we have to be very measured as we introduce AI and really foreground the safe and responsible introduction as it can be shown that it can be used appropriately. But having said that, the demand for AI-ready data is becoming a huge driver in health systems in every space. And I wonder if that's not going to start to accelerate movement on the integrated real-time data analytics side that we needed if we're going to run some of these really powerful AI tools as they're shown that they can be used safely and responsibly.
Absolutely. And many of the tasks that healthcare providers have historically done in our clinics and in our hospitals will be done by AI. It will be needing those data feeds to do it. So you might absolutely be right, John, that AI may be pushing us in this direction more rapidly than we're comfortable with often.
I was expecting more questions. Did we stun you all into silence?
We have a minute, I think, left, Kathy, but please feel.
Well, then feel free to answer this one quickly.
Yeah.
You talk about the three-legged stool, and
Yep.
with that come different perspectives and very different organizational and work cultures. And so when you bring those cultures together and ask them to work together, or sort of across those cultures, what have you learned about that? Like just in terms of government working with academia and all the different sort of ways you could slice it. They're very different work cultures.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. But I would just say that I think in Ontario, Rob has done the best job of anybody of setting up an environment in which those three stools come together at Trillium. So it's a single hospital system, population of about 1 million people. And the Hospital Research Institute, which in any other hospital in Ontario is all these biomedical labs, all this other stuff. It's not about impact on the system. This one is 100% focused on bringing together the evidence generators, the system operators, and the patient family caregiver partners. I don't see that in Hamilton, where I work. I don't see it in other places, but they've shown that it can be done.
Yeah, culture is probably the hardest nut to crack. You're absolutely right, because we all work in our different cultures that often don't mesh well together. And I was the chief culture officer as much as I was the chief scientific officer at Trillium. And there's a couple things that were really important. One is to really set the tone from the CEO or from the executive office, is that the expectation is that we do work together to solve these problems. We make sure we're hiring for those properties around those types of cultures and bringing people into the organization that want to work with other departments and want to work together collaboratively with other groups. And then really starting to get some quick wins to demonstrate that this is a really cool thing to do, to be able to bring research together with research operations and patients to dramatically change a problem at the hospital, and demonstrate to other divisions of the hospital that may be a little bit more suspicious. That has been progressively how we built that culture over time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for opening up this conversation locally. We have a lot of ground to cover in Manitoba, but I think that we have a lot of potential as well. So thank you very much for taking your time today as well.